What zero tolerance school stories do you have? I didn't get a warning or anything, so I'm not sure if this even counts as zero tolerance, but here you go. Reposted from here. After I'd beaten the original Half-Life, I started rooting around on the install CD and found that they had included Worldcraft on the disc, so I installed it and gave it a shot. Mapping very quickly became a hobby of mine. As a result, I got very interested in architecture and geometry and started to take more notice of the way buildings were structured and laid out. I tried to get my friends into it, but I clearly took to it more than they did. But that was totally fine, since it meant I had a group of dedicated playtesters at my disposal. In I had mentioned something about the blocky, boxy design of our school, and that it would translate pretty easily into the grid-based low-polygon world of Quake-based maps. As a few of us were walking between classes, we talked a bit about it, pointing out how to model each shape, where we could cheat and optimize things, where we might need to do manual sleeve splits, and so on, but didn't make any plans to do anything. That evening, I went home and blocked out about a 15 FT2 area and abandoned the idea after a few hours because the school itself was architecturally boring and pretty tedious to work on. It's important to note that I didn't publicly release this whip point. That must have been in the middle or end of a week. Fast forward to the next Monday, and my biology class is interrupted by 5 or 6 police armed with pistols. They entered through all 3 classroom doors at the exact same time, and must have known the seating arrangement ahead of time, because they instantly focused on me and moved in extremely quickly without breaking into a run. 1 took my backpack at arm's length. 2 took me in that arm twisting underarm hold thing where the kinda half carry you. I was never cuffed. When we got outside, I saw at least 3 more, 1 with a shotgun, 2 more going through my locker. When we got to the administration building, I was led into a room in the back and kept there for pretty much the rest of the day and questioned on and off by various cops and guidance counselors / school psychologists. They wanted to know where I had hid my bombs, how many guns I had access to, if I had stashed extra ammunition anywhere, and reminded me repeatedly that, if anyone had stumbled across one of the weapons I had hidden somewhere across the school, I'd be liable for anything that happened. They said on several occasions that they had enough to arrest me for conspiracy to commit murder, and insisted that I just cooperate and give up my compatriots. Needless to say, I was scared shitless and terribly confused. Apparently, over the weekend, the little discussion I had had with a few friends as we were walking through the halls had been overheard and grossly exaggerated. The idea to make a level had transformed into me already having a level of the school completed. Placing entities such as doors had transformed into placing students everywhere, and doing it in the Half-Life engine apparently meant that I had built a massacre planning tool. What the police had heard from their source was so vastly different from the reality I understood that I spent the first hour of questioning completely lost and confused because I genuinely could not understand what they were asking about. Their source had apparently said that I had individually replicated the entire student body and thusly asked who I planned on targeting first. I tried explaining how long hand making 2000 models and textures by hand would take, but they seemed to tune out every time I opened my mouth. Their source maintained that I had publicly released this map and that he had played it multiple times at my insistence. There were other things. My dad had been on Paris for business and had grabbed some French newspapers for me, which I had stashed in my locker, waiting for a show and tell opportunity in my French class. I spent probably a half hour of my questioning reassuring the police that this was, in fact, French, and not some kind of secret code language that I was using to communicate with people. They took the newspapers and I never got them back. After the initial holy fucking shit theory pointing guns at wore off, it was a very strange day. One of the cops, I don't remember who, must have eventually figured out what was going on, because he and I spent the last hour or so talking about Pixar and computer animated movies. I understand that they sent police cars to my family members' houses and searched at least my parents' house, but I don't think they had a warrant. My dad was out of state at the time, and my mom did not take my side. I'm pretty sure she waived my right to have an adult or attorney present during questioning, and I know she told the cops to arrest me and that she would not post bail. I know exactly who the police's source was. I was good friends with him and his brother for a few years. I have not spoken to either since I was dragged out of class. I have no idea what I did to anger either or both of them. It's important to note that this was sometime after the turn of the millennium, but before September 11th. If it was afterwards, I'm completely confident I would have been on the receiving end of a proper SWAT team and the entire school would have been evacuated. TLDR zip zop zoobity bam. Time to nuke Afghanistan. I went to a very shitty school district. I mean, this place is scum in so many ways. My little brother has had mild autism. He's a very nice kid and always has been. I mean, he opens doors for everyone and compliments people he doesn't even know. Anyways, there was a kid in his grade who was the biggest asshole. He was mean to everyone, even the poor kids who were his friends. He always picked on my brother and his friends, calling them retarded and everything else. One day, we get a code red. Everyone is stuck in their classrooms and there had been a recent trend in girls fighting in the bathroom, so everyone assumed that was what was going on. No. I wish it had been a girl fight. I get called down to the office about an hour later. My brother and his best friend were walking to class. They were at the top of one of the stairwells when asshole Makashat came up behind them and shoved my brother down the stairs as hard as he could. My brother tried to grab onto the brick wall to stop himself from falling and ended up dragging his hand down the bricks, ripping his hand apart. He still has the scar. He hit his face on the tile at the bottom after doing several head over heels rolls down the stairs. His nose and lip were bleeding and his back was hurt so bad they thought he had broken it. He ended up going to the ER. Fast forward a week later. He's back in school and the principal calls him to her office. This bitch, I don't know how this bitch was ever allowed to work in a school. She made my brother shake hands with arsehole and make up. She said the alternative was both of them getting suspended because she did not believe my brother did nothing to provoke him from pushing him down the stairs, despite 2 witnesses telling her what happened. My brother has been bitter over that ever since. Also, when my mom found out he had to shake arsehole Makashat's hand, she went to the school and confronted the principal. The principal told my mom, well, maybe if your son wasn't annoying it wouldn't have happened. My mom pulled her across the desk and a secretary had to pull her off of her. This one is kind of like the other bully comments, but a bit more severe. So when I was a senior in high school I got into my second physical fight ever. I was not a nerd. I was a loner/stoner and really disliked my school's administration for various reasons. I also went to a high school that was in my town full of rich spoiled kids. You could tell because the student lot had nicer cars than the teachers. Anyways, I was raised by a single mother who worked her ass off to provide me with a good home and clothes on my back. Back to the story at hand. I was never friends with any of the athletes in my school, but didn't have anything against them either. Except for one, JW, his initials. This guy had bullied me since elementary school and never stopped for no apparent reason. For years he constantly tried humiliating, intimidating and generally berating me in front of others. So senior year rolls around and he decides to try to impress some other kids in my grade by asking me to fight him during a lunch period, thinking I would say no. I usually ignored his BS for years and years. Finally I had enough. I told him, sure, I'll beat your ass in front of all your friends. My answer shocked him and his friends, I guess, and he bragged for a solid 2 minutes claiming he would beat me up so bad I wouldn't be able to walk afterwards. I have my few friends gathered around us at this point. Little did JW know I had taken kickboxing courses for around 3 years until recently. He swung first and I ducked, then I hit him hard. He went down and I got on top of him and started punching him in the face. When he started blocking his face I went for his ribs. Eventually the fight was broken up and he was crying. We all go back to class, me pumped with adrenaline and thinking my left hand might have a broken finger or two. I was in math when I get called down to the office. Neither of us ratted the other out, but somehow the school saw the whole fight on camera and even saw him swing first. We both get suspended for 3 days, much like other comments I see, but that is not the end point. On my first day of suspension I'm home alone and hear a knock on the door. It was a woman I had kind of recognized, but couldn't put my finger on it. I answer the door and start getting screamed at by this woman. It was JW's mother. She says she is going to sue the shit out of me for attacking her son who did not provoke me in any way. Her husband is a lawyer and they are a very well-off family. I'm by no means poor, but I still had a part-time job and paid my own way for many things. I called the police on her since I closed the door in her face and just walked inside. She still stood on my porch screaming. All in all, nothing even came of any of this and her threats were empty. Plus there was the fact that the video of the fight showed him verbally abusing me and throwing the first punch. I never got fucked with by any athlete again and eventually graduated. .dl. Doctor got into a fight with a rich jock. He swung first and I beat his ass. Got suspended and his bitchy mother threatened to sue me. Even though I did not have much point. Sorry for the wall of text. I got really into writing this. This is probably going to get really buried, but why not? My school's response to everything was to suspend you. These are all personal experiences I went through. My high school principal had a severe obsession with what I wore. Always would stop me in the hallway on the way to class to point out my clothes are too revealing, tell me to lean forward for a cleavage test, and would send me home for disrupting the school. And after 3 strikes you were suspended for 3 days. I never even wore revealing clothes, unless you consider a button-up flannel, tank top, and jeans revealing. I mean, I was 14. 50-year-old men should not be concerned with the non-existent cleavage of a high school freshman. If you were tardy to school or to class more than 3 times a semester, you were suspended for 3 days. If it happened again, you were suspended for 5 days, and so on. Course, you know the best way to punish someone for being late and missing out on class is to cause them to miss 3 whole class days rather than only the few minutes they were late. If you took too many sick days without a doctor's note, you were suspended. I mean, you missed too many days. How about we cause you to miss even more? Not everyone can afford $300 doctor visit to confirm you have a terrible cold. If you missed too many total days of school, suspension/sick days/terides included, you were suspended. I know this because I missed a total of 30 days of school thanks to being sick and previous suspensions, and whenever I tried to come back to school, they would suspended me for 3, then 5, then 10 days. When I pointed out the stupidity of it all, they just quoted, "We are a zero-tolerance school, and we do not support truancy of any kind," before handing me another suspension slip. At least I got to watch my dad call the head principal every name in the book. I went to a Catholic private school for 10 years before high school. I had one friend who had anger management problems for a while, which led to him having a very short temper. Otherwise, he was a very nice guy and fun to hang out with. The problem with this is that kids can be ruthless assholes towards each other, and there were a few kids in my class who targeted my friend because they thought his reactions were funny. There were 2 kids in particular who did this. Let's call them A and B for simplicity. Was a very strange kid. He acted somewhat like your stereotypical nerdy kid. He was a Boy Scout, always spoke in what he thought were funny voices, made SpongeBob jokes, was terribly bad at sports, could hardly even lift a basketball. The difference between him and your stereotypical nerdy kid is that this guy was a complete dumbass. Didn't do particularly well in school, but also constantly got into things he didn't know how to get himself out of. Anyway, he liked teasing my friend a lot. I was a super sheltered kid and was somewhat under the impression that he wasn't a shareable. Well, he started to get brave and was messing with my friend while we were playing basketball, calling him all sorts of stupid middle school names and such, until my friend spins around and beans her in the face with the basketball. Bursts into tears and has the principal with him in less than 5 minutes. My friend gets detention and doesn't get in trouble because he wasn't being physical and was looking pretty pathetic at the time. This continued on until my friend eventually left the school. And then there was B. B was also kind of looked at as one of the losers at our school. The difference between him and A was that he was more athletic and clever. B had previously had no reputation for being a bad kid besides messing around in class every now and then. Anyway, he started messing with my friend in a similar manner as I did. However, he was much more active about it and eventually started insulting my friend's family as well. My friend had 2 siblings at the school as well. Now, this would seem easy enough to ignore, but like I said, my friend had some anger management issues and had a hard time letting things like that go. So, instead of getting physical this time, he sent me an email saying something along the lines of, if you talk shit about my family anymore I will fucking kill you. Obviously, he didn't mean he would kill him literally, that was far beyond his limits. However, instead of just teasing my friend more, B took the issue to the authorities at the school, claiming my friend's message was a death threat. A fucking death threat. When I first heard of this, it was the single most ridiculous thing I'd ever heard. Logic would lead your average person to believe the school would have given my friend another detention or something and left it alone, but no. They talked with his mom, and his mom brought that bullshit. My son is such a little angel. He couldn't possibly have done anything to deserve this. Yeah, the school bought it. From here on out the details became a little unclear with the way the school handled it in a relatively private manner. I do know that my friend was suspended for about a week or so until the school and his parents came to the decision that he should switch schools. I'm not sure I technically count it as expulsion, but it was definitely supported by the school. Point anyway, he starts going to this new school and guess what? Everyone likes him there. He was in the process of getting medication for his problem, and he was much calmer because nobody actively tried to fuck with him. Now his problem is gone completely, and he's one of the chillest guys I know. So I sat next to this kid in computer class. We were like 14. Every day, he would just call me gay, constantly, all semester. It wasn't really a big deal for a while. It just got fucking annoying hearing the same thing constantly every day all semester. Teacher did jack shit about it. Finally, one day, I said, hey, if you call me gay again, I'm going to punch you in the face. You're too gay to do it. So I hit him once right in the middle of the forehead. Got some crazy good momentum built up from the pivoting desk chair. Completely quiet room, then a loud smack. No one fucking noticed. Point anyway, he went to the principal. I admitted it cause I'm a bad liar. It was pretty satisfying because it left this giant purple knot on his forehead. My parents had my back because I'd tried getting the teacher to stop him beforehand. Point anyway, this was right before the standardized testing and I was gonna be suspended during that. I was one of like 4 kids that always had crazy good scores on it, so they called our house and asked if I'd come take it. Yay, sure, I'll be there. Okay, but since you're suspended, you can't ride the bus. Then I won't be there. Finally they decided to send a fucking teacher to get me from my house. Turns out it was the computers teacher. Weird ride. I had to sit in a separate room and take my test, so I didn't endanger the populace or some shit. Later in the semester, they had some sort of field trip for people that did well on the test. They said I couldn't go because I was suspended during the test. So my parents took me out to school that day for a dentist's appointment. It was a good day. Then there was a time I got jumped on by a kid because I had my elbow on his desk. While he was flipping my desk over on top of me, my elbow hit him, so I got suspended. My mom told the principal she was just going to start teaching me and my sister to beat the shit out of anyone who touches us if we are gonna get suspended anyway. He freaked the fuck out. Holy fuck, that school was terrible. I'm late to this thread and likely won't be seen. But this happened around 12 years ago when I was in 10th grade. So back in 10th grade, I was a chubby quiet kid. I was getting pushed around by a group of 11th graders who thought it was great to pick on somebody smaller than them. They would plan on getting me in trouble by instigating things where a teacher was close by so they could see the fracas and get me in trouble. And the mid times, because the school had a zero tolerance policy, means I must have wanted to fight. So after 8-10 in school suspension throughout the year, even after going to see the administration about the issue, all they said was, well, you shouldn't put yourself in such a situation, so you are just as guilty as them. Summer hit. I was no longer chubby, but grew a ton. I went from 5'7" to 6'4", still weighing the 200 pounds. I was in 10th. School comes back. They kept at it, but after the first altercation, I was again sent to the administration for fighting once more and told the principal, next time I'm going to fight back. If you keep suspending me, I might as well fight back. And of course he just said, "I'll have to suspend you if you fight back." So really, he didn't give two shits. The next week, they come by again, push me around a bit near my locker. I snapped. There were two of them, one on each side. All I remember was picking up one guy and doing a full-on body slam on the floor and turning around and beat the piss out of the other guy, pushed him against the row of lockers, heat-butt him, and started punching his face before I continued on the ground. At that point I blacked out of rage and realized what was happening. When I was being held down, the guy I threw down had a concussion and the one I punched had a broken nose and cracked eye socket from the head, but we all got the same. 2 days internal suspension for fighting. I was never bullied again. This'll get buried, but that's okay. I got suspended twice, both times for less than a day, for fighting. My school had a zero tolerance policy for fighting. One of those, if you fight back that counts first time. One was pretty famous in my grade. In my school system, it's split up between elementary/middle/HS, and we did a graduation for middle school, end of 8th grade. We have practice for it. We are in the auditorium, they're going over everything that'll happen. My class is more in the back of the auditorium, about 2 seats over from me, one person in between us. There's a kid that's being an asshole. He has a sharp key, like a padlock key, tiny pointy/sharp, and he's randomly poking/cutting people with it. Yes, he was kind of a bully before that point, so he's picking on these kids in the row in front of him, and he keeps cutting them. Again, you know, it's shallow, but it's still a small, what the fuck, on the back of their necks. I tell him to knock that shit off. He doesn't. I give him a shove. Again, we are still seated. Tell him to stop. He uses the key and slashes my arm with this key. So I shove him hard out of his seat, so he gets sort of wedged in between the seats. He gets up and throws a punch. I get up and shove him even harder back into the ground. I was much bigger than him and yell at him to stop. He's getting up to come at me again, and I'm in motion to punch him. I'm aiming for his face. It's a tight space, and he's moving towards me. I'm going to be able to connect. It's right then that one of our teachers bear hugs me from behind and drags me back. It's then I realize, when I yelled to stop, I yelled loudly. Everyone heard it, so everyone in the grade had the image of looking towards the back of the auditorium, with it looking like I'm about to kill a kid half my size with a punch to the face. Most talked about incident that last week of school. I was immediately suspended by the vice principal on the spot. The principal calls my house the next morning, says they talked to other students, found out that I wasn't the aggressor, and that I was attempting to standing up for others, apologized for me having been suspended, invites me back to school, and removes it from the record that I was suspended. Second time, in high school, at lunch, senior year, have my normal table of 6th 7th friends. Someone notices at a table next to us, where these 3 super nerdy quiet kids who were like freshmen, maybe sophomores, not sure, normally sit. There's a junior who's come over to the table and is bullying them. He took an orange from their tray and is literally bouncing it off this one kid's face, picking it up and bouncing it off him again. Not hard, but enough to bounce an orange off this kid's forehead/face. He's just taking it. All 3 of these poor kids are just kinda sitting there. And this bully is one of those kids who thinks it's cool to bully the younger kids, but is kind of an unpopular fat shit, so he can't really bully anyone. He specifically has to pick on unpopular weird kids. One of the kids meekly tells him to stop, and he starts bouncing the orange off that kid's face, and fat shit's 2 friends a table over from them are yucking it up. I tell him to stop, no response, continues the bouncing. I get up, snatch orange, and shove it into his face, breaking open said orange on his face. I follow this up with like grinding this orange into his face. Now he has orange bits and juice on his face/shirt. He's a fat shit and I'm huge. He just gets verbally upset. Nerd kids think this is a hilarious turn of events. I don't even know them. I only know them as those nerdy kids that sit near us at lunch. Sometimes teacher watching lunch sees a commotion, comes over, we both get sent to the office. Fun coincidence, same teacher that had grabbed me in the story above in 8th grade. Since one of us is covered in orange, and teacher saw me hit him in the face with this orange, I got immediately suspended for fighting. Similar result. My mom gets called the next day in the afternoon. I'm allowed back. No record. I wound up talking to the principal. He's giving me a small talking to, and I asked what changed. Apparently, the next day at lunch, the main kid getting bullied was going to thank me, and I wasn't there. My friends told him that I got suspended. Turns out, he immediately went to the principal's office and threw a fit. Not like he stopped at the secretary's desk, asked to speak with him or anything. He just walks directly into the principal's office and has a meltdown, crying about how he gets bullied all the time. No one ever does anything about it, and now his bully is back at lunch but I'm suspended. Has to calm the kid down before he can figure out what's pouring out of this hysterical kid's mouth. Principal decided that my standing up for others was okay, even though he still lectured me on, next time, finding non-violent solutions to my problems. My personal opinion was, if the teachers at lunch aren't noticing this kid getting bullied, I can stop it. And my solution put a permanent end to it. My best friend always commented on how I was like an anti-bullying middle/high school, and that I would show no mercy to anyone being a bully. I've always been big for my age. I'm 6 feet 4 inches as an adult. I was horribly picked on, bullied, and beaten up a couple times growing up, in 2nd, 3rd grade. Even though I was bigger, I was always a very quiet, passive child. We moved when I was in elementary school, and when we went to a new district school, I vowed I'd never be picked on again. My friends growing up in middle/high school had no idea about that, but it shaped me tremendously, and I've never put up with that shit. I think even today would be different. We had a zero tolerance policy for any type of fighting, including fighting back. But bullying wasn't shit. I graduated HS early 2000s. No one cared. Nowadays, the school districts would fuck those bullies up. Shit, my son had an issue the start of this year in 1st grade being bullied, and they went crazy on that situation. April 1st, 2003. A girl brought in a gag gift for April Fool's Day. It was a butter knife coated in plastic peanut butter. She was wiping it on people at lunch, getting them to freak out. Well, I had the class right after lunch with her and asked to see it before class. Right then the teacher walks in and sees me holding this knife walking towards another student and flips. Runs over to me, grabs the gag gift out of my hand and shouts at me to go to the office. I tried to explain my intentions, but she didn't want to hear it. In the office, the principal and 2 police officers were there talking about charging me with assault with intent to bodily harm. They called my parents to come to the school to talk about my punishment. When my dad got there, he asked to see the knife and they showed it to him. They explained that I could have broken the plastic peanut butter off and then had a knife to stab kids with. My dad's face when she said this was priceless. First he asked where I got it. I told him from a girl in class. He then asked why she wasn't in here for bringing it to school. They didn't have an answer. Then he proceeded to tell them about all the knives we had at home, and if I wanted to hurt someone I could bring one of those, or the X-Acto knife I had in my school bag for art class, or the scissors I had in my bag, or the blade on the paper cutter in the teacher's room. And then to top it off he said, and I quote, or he could take one of my 40 guns that he had been trained to shoot since he was 5 years old, has placed in many competitions, has tactical training in, and could probably outshoot both of these rent-a-cops you have standing next to you. He grabbed me by the hand and told my mom to come with him and started to leave. The principal asked where we were going, and he said home. Call me when you will allow my son back in school, because I'm not going to have him persecuted for holding a metal stick with plastic in it. 3 days later the school called and said I could return to school as they didn't see any reason I should be punished. Mine was actually a pretty decent one overall. I had a really awesome guy as a vice principal. So anyways, I was in my grade 9 geography class. Our teacher was out of the room and this little prick of a kid I already didn't like. Long story, he was a dick. Mom jokes and stuff. Went up to the teacher's desk and grabbed a little toy gun off of the desk that you clicked a switch on the back, and she would hit a ruler into her hand. If you didn't already suspect, it was at a Catholic school. So he's playing with this. Then he grabs an actual ruler and is imitating the toy nun smacking the ruler into his hand. Then for some reason this kid I didn't even have a problem with said, haha, why don't you try hitting bonsai _ tree with it? just looked up at the kid with the ruler, it was one of the metal cork-backed ones, and said, "Don't fucking go near me with that thing." He walks over and is teasing me with it, and I tell him I'm serious, don't fucking touch me, but he is egging him on a bit, and he taps me with it, not hard, but I already warned him. I stand up and shove him and tell him to fuck off again, I think, and sit back down. Then he comes back again and this time slaps me hard in the face with the ruler. I shoot up and run at him, flailing and punching at him. He turtles and I end up punching him a few times in the back of the head. Then I turned away and was walking back to my desk. I look back and he chucks the ruler at my face. It cut a 3-inch gash in my face about an inch from my right eye. Remember, it was one of those hefty full metal rulers with a cork back, but the edges were pretty sharp point. As the ruler was in the air, the teacher comes back into the room, who happens to be a new teacher, first year at our school, fresh off from playing as a linebacker in his college, only about 6 feet 2 inches but built, and grabs us both by the scruff and marches us out before anything else can happen. Told him and the VP what happened. After they discuss it, the VP calls us in one at a time and tells me he's really sorry that he has to do this at all, since he knew I was just sticking up for myself, but due to the school's rules he had to suspend me for fighting. I think I got a 1 or 2 day suspension and the other kid got a 3 or 4 day suspension. VP was super nice about it, but his hands were tied. Luckily my parents were understanding too and always told me to stand up for myself, so they weren't mad at me for getting suspended, but because they didn't want me to get rewarded for it with a day off either. I had a full day of chores to do, and I would have rather gone to school instead in the end, lol. I still don't really know why the kid started shit with me, as he wasn't overall a bully with anyone else I saw, and at the time he was a scrawny jit, and I was twice the size of him. Never had any more shit from him or anyone really. Point TLDR. Guy tapped me with a metal ruler. When I warned him not to touch me, I shoved him. He slapped me hard with a metal ruler. I got up and punched him as he turtled. Walking away he threw a metal ruler at me and almost cut my eye open. I was suspended 1 day, he was suspended 3. I was suspended for my virulent hate. If Macbeth. Point explanation. Okay, so the school I attend has a 1-hour study block every Tuesday morning, and during one of these study periods, I was doing some sort of Macbeth bullshit. I got super pissed and started talking about how the story is awful and how we can barely read it the way it's written. You know, basic teenage angst / Shakespeare is trash stuff. And then the teacher tells me that I can't talk like that. I wasn't cursing or anything, and so naturally I didn't stop. She called me over to her desk and told me to sit in the hall after I kept going, and I was not into that, so I refused and stayed in my desk. Fast forward 5 minutes. The woman has gotten the principal, who then calls me into the hall, and thinking I was being unjustly persecuted, I again refused. She then said, "Do you know who I am?" And I said, "No I don't." Yes, I knew who she was, and she goes, "I'm the principal," and I respond with my now infamous lie, "No, you're the principal." Suddenly my parents are there. I'm in the office, and the principal is talking to us, and asks me if I wanna even be at this school. It's a private school, and I, the genius I'm, instead of just saying yes, said, "Well, you don't give refunds, so I guess I have to stay." This whole time, mind you, I'm still arguing about how shitty Shakespeare is, and next thing I know I'm suspended 2 days. Supposed to come back to school Friday, decide to skip instead, because they don't choice. When I go to school, I do, right? And that's how me not shutting up about Macbeth led to me being suspended. In middle school we had a zero tolerance policy towards fighting. I had a bully, and one time we got into a fight. I was thinking I don't want detention, so I avoided the fighting back, thinking I was going avoid detention. Well, I got the same punishment as him. Per school policy. This was at the start of the year, and I was fucking pissed that I got in trouble for getting beat up. I had picked up weightlifting and boxing in those few months. Then came that faithful May Day when that very same bully pushed me. I told him to punch me again, and I'll end him. He did, right in the gut. I was hurt. I leaned over in pain, clenching my book bag. He stood there laughing at me. I grabbed the strap of my book bag and used it as a leverage and pounded him right in the face with the book bag. He went down, and I jumped on top of him, punching him as hard as I could. There was a fair bit of blood. We were eventually broken up by a teacher. Teacher pulled me away, and I said I was fine. I'm clam. I'm done. Teacher went to go attend to the injured bully who was still in the ground. I was standing there with no one restraining me. It was an oversight on their part. I ran across the narrow hallway and kicked that fucker right in the balls. He curled up in pain. The teacher jumped back in shock and I then jumped on top of him, elbowing him in the nose. This all happened in just seconds. We were later in the principal office, and I had the biggest shit-eating grin on my face. The principal said to me, "Why did you go this far?" I said, "Because I was going get in trouble for being involved in a fight, might as well make it worth my while." Very late to the party, but when I was in high school I was given a Saturday detention because of our zero tolerance uniform rules. Not that bad a punishment, but the reason for it was rather annoying. I went to an all-girls school which had very strict rules about how our uniform looked. In the UK, we have to wear uniform. We had an exhaustive list of rules about the length of our skirts, the fabric of our shirts, the style of them, the length of our ties, the color of our hair ties, etc. The usual. One year, there was a really horrible snowstorm in our region, but our school, and a few of the other more prestigious ones in the area, were open. Because of the nature of the weather, I had taken to wearing my large winter coat, a few layers of tights/pantyhose, black trousers and my Wellington boots over my uniform. At this point, I should make you aware that, even on the way to school, we were only allowed to wear the school's coat. A very thin jacket with the crest on it, a normal length pleated skirt, a pair of black tights and flat, smart shoes. In spite of this knowledge, I made my way to school where I planned on changing into my full uniform as normal. As I made my way through the doors, the vice principal grabbed me and pulled me aside, hissing at me the question, "Who gave you permission to break the uniform rules?" I tried to explain to her about the fact I was going to change into my proper uniform when I got in and dried, but I was carted off to the principal's office anyway. There, I was told I didn't look remorseful enough when confronted about breaking conduct, and that I was getting a Saturday afternoon because of my insubordination. The next day, I had to wear only my tights, flat shoes and school coat, because the school said they were keeping an extra eye out for pupils not following the uniform rules. I was freezing, and during homeroom and classes, my uniform was squeaky wet around the bottom of my legs and my shoes from where I walked in the snow. Yet, I got in trouble again, and was threatened with suspension, because a teacher saw me from the window, wearing a scarf that wasn't part of the uniform. Not long after that, compiled with many more reasons against it, my mum finally took me out of that school. And thank goodness after reminiscing about it with my mum, she reminded me of this. A letter was sent to alert everyone at home of my punishment and what I had done to deserve it. My mum just wrote "lol" in the comment section, sent it back to my school, and told them what a joke they were. My high school had moved to a zero tolerance policy on fighting my senior year. It went into full effect in the spring, after a particularly bad fight off campus. Anyone caught fighting on or off campus equals automatic expulsion. There was this one girl, we'll call her Mariah. She was a little rough, but mostly just hung out with the wrong crowd. Senior year she decided she wanted to actually graduate, maybe make something of herself, and she pulled away from the crowd. Well, this crowd was actually a gang, and they didn't like one of their members ditching. The whole year she was getting beat up, but no one was ever caught. She ended up in ICE a lot, though. She wasn't going to be able to walk at graduation, but she was on track to actually graduate. It's just after prom, May. Graduation is just a few weeks away. Senioritis was kicking in hard. I can remember the day clearly, because it was one of the worst days in school ever. It was the end of the last lunch wave. The caf was clearing out. Mariah had become a choir nerd. We traveled in packs and offered the security of witnesses. Apparently that day it didn't matter, it started with a punch to her head. Full on punch. I can still remember the sound. Someone pulled her to the ground by the backpack. And then there were 4 or 5 girls I to this day don't know the names of, because they were underclassmen and I just never knew them. They were kicking and stomping, and then they were off running before the teachers or security guards could react. And there was Mariah on the floor, curled up in a ball, bruised and bleeding. She had a broken nose, broken fingers, broken ribs, bruises all over her body. She was immediately expelled, since the policy didn't care if you were a victim of a beatdown or not. She was in a fight. After a long lawsuit from her parents, she was allowed to repeat the year, but she went to another school instead. 2 other girls were eventually expelled as well, but there were others who couldn't be identified. My brother got into a fight with a kid he didn't know when he was in middle school. This was in Florida, where there were a ton of black and Hispanic people but no Asians. My brother and this one other half Japanese kid were the only Asians in the whole school. The story was told to me like this by my younger brother on the bus waiting to go home. Some skinny black kid comes up to my brother, who weighed around 230 pounds and recently just got a growth spurt from 5'4" to about 5'10", that lucky bastard, and said my brother was talking shit about him. My brother told the kid that he had no idea who he was and didn't talk shit about anyone. The black kid said he didn't believe him and slapped my brother in the face. My brother got in trouble once before for defending himself, and he didn't wanna get in trouble again, so he kept his cool and just repeated that he had no idea who the bully was. The bully just slapped my brother in the face again and said my brother was lying. My brother again kept his cool and told the bully that he doesn't know who he was and he didn't talk shit, but if he was slapped again, he was gonna kick his ass. This is where it gets fun. The bully decided to be an idiot and slap my brother one more time. At this point my brother had had enough, but he didn't explode with rage like the Hulk would have. Instead he got up slowly and just said, "You really wanna do this?" And as soon as he finished his words, the bully tried hitting my brother. I don't remember if my brother got hit or he dodged/blocked the punch, but after the first real attack on my brother somehow got the bully in a headlock and started hitting the other kid while holding him at the same time. The bully started getting more aggressive, obviously, but my brother decided to shove the kid's head through the tiny little window in the bus. It wasn't closed, mind you, so it's not like his head went through the window. It was already open and my brother just shoved the bully's head through it. At that point, the bully was flailing his arms trying to hit my brother, but all he managed to do was poke my brother's eye, which really pissed him off for some reason. Lol. I don't remember exactly what happened after that, since this all happened back in 2004/2005. The next day my dad had to go to school with my brother and they had a talk with the principal. The principal told my dad that because my brother was involved in the fight, even though he fucking tried using words to defuse the situation at first, both my brother and the bully would be suspended for 4 days. My dad just straight up told the principal that's bullshit and a stupid policy. While still in the principal's office, my dad told my brother, in front of the principal, that what he did was right and he was proud of my brother. They went to get food afterwards, and Noon picked on him again. Probably because everyone heard what happened, and probably because he gained another 20 or so pounds, and grew another 2 inches. The suspicion of marijuana residue. 1999. We had a program in our school called Crime Stoppers. Basically turn your friends or random people in for drugs, and get a cash reward. What could go wrong? I was escorted to the principal's office. Waiting for me was the resource officer and the principal and my accuser. A girl I kind of knew sort of, proceeds to tell a story. She says that I gave her a partially burned joint that I retrieved from my cowboy hat and handed to her. I had not, and in fact, had skipped school most of the morning. The resource officer takes my hat and removes the lining and shakes something onto a sheet of paper. It looked like Lenten specks. Who knows what it was? It was not marijuana residue as the test kit reveals. The girl continues to tell her story about how I had given her and several other students joints in the past. I'm the joint fairy. With the lack of any real evidence in just this girl's story, the police and the principal do the only logical thing. I'm issued a citation for suspicion of marijuana residue and sent to an alternative education program school jail. My grandparents try and fight the school board in the ticket, but with zero tolerance comes zero discretion. I do 100 hours community service and miss the majority of my junior year. The girl ends up in the same alternative education program for, you guessed it, possession. I never got to defend myself. I never saw the joint I was supposed to have given her. In fact, it was never mentioned, nor was it discussed at the school board hearing. They just took her word for it. My only run-in with the police, I was angry and scared to shit. I wanted to go to college and that shit could have sank me. It excluded me from sports for a season and made me look to others like a dopehead. It was my senior year. The school had a mandatory 25-minute study hall third period. It was around May. My two friends and I didn't have anything to do. I mean, it was May, and we were seniors anyway. The school hated when people would leave class and go to the vending machines, so they told the teachers not to let us go. Lucky for us, we had a cool teacher. We went to her and asked if we could go to the cafeteria and get some drinks from the vending machine. She said we could go, but she couldn't give us a pass, so if we got caught we had to lie and say we were skipping. All three of us were like, yeah, we won't get caught. It's fine. So, we begin the journey to the cafeteria, taking as long as we can because fuck it. In order to get to the cafeteria you've got to walk past the principal's office, as well as the hall monitor desk at the front entrance to the school. We get past both easy on our way. We get to the cafeteria and the study hall teacher in there didn't give a fuck, so we went to the vending machine. My friend put his dollar in the machine and hit the lemonade button. He did so, and the machine just let loose and lemonade after lemonade came falling out. Everyone in the study hall was looking at us as we tried to pick up the rolling cans off the floor. The teacher came over to interrogate us and asked what we did. We told her, and she left us alone. We asked her what to do with the extra cans, and she told us she didn't care what we did. So, being the people we are, we each grabbed 2 cans and leave the rest on the table. We get to walking back to study hall with half the mission complete. We get past the principal's office, about to turn the corner past the front desk, and boom, the principal is coming around the corner at the same time. He looks at us and asks, where'd you fellas get the lemonade? And I'm thinking, the cafeteria, you idiot, where else? One of my friends says the vending machine. So, Mr. Peck, being the cool dude that he is, has us follow him to his office. He questioned us about where we were supposed to be and why we weren't there, all that bullshit. We told him we were skipping. He asked why we had so many lemonades, and we lie and say we paid for 3 of them, not 6. He didn't seem upset that we essentially stole the other 3. He decides the fair punishment for it would be to write us up and give us each 2 days of detention for getting a drink. TL. Doctor got written up and had detention for 2 days for getting a drink from the vending machine. Not me, but my brother, although I played a small part in this story. He's sitting here recounting the story for me. Here we go. One fateful day in 7th grade, my brother is walking to another class during a passing period. On the way, a friend of his offers him some gum contraband, but who didn't chew gum anyway. He accepts, extends his hand out to take some, and instead of gum being dropped into his hands, a small mysterious white pill is instead. On he goes to his next class, knowing it would be pretty dumb to just consume some random pill that was just put in his hands. He throws it in the garbage as soon as he gets to the next class. End of story, right? Nope. After 40 minutes that class ends. He goes to the next class and the principal of the school is standing at the door. He walks past him, takes his seat as everyone else is filtering in. The bell rings and class begins. Before the teacher says anything, the principal walks in and asks loudly, is Amazonist's brother here? As a wave of horror overtakes him, he was a kid who never got into trouble. My brother raises his hand. He is then escorted to the principal's office and interrogated on the events that transpired during the previous passing period. Of course, he's not all that worried because he threw it away, the right thing to do, right? He tells this to the principal, who then goes and gets the trash can out of the classroom it was thrown away in, and, lo and behold, there's a pill. Perfect. Exoneration. I'll just gather my things and head back to class. Brother thinks, welp. Fast forward to the next day. Brother gets called to the principal's office again and learns he is receiving a 10-day suspension. Tears worthy of class 5 rapid start flowing. But I threw it away, he says. Apparently, that didn't matter because he was still in possession of drugs. He shouldn't have accepted them to begin with. Skipping over a lot of the minutia here. The suspension, which should not have happened in the first place, was talked down to 5 days. The whole city had heard about this miscarriage of justice by now, so he served out the suspension. by being taken out to lunch by sympathetic neighbors and feeding squirrels crackers with peanut butter in the backyard because all his friends were at school, so he had nothing to do. After the 5-day suspension, he got dropped off at school by our mom, and all the students standing outside waiting to be let in for the day, probably about 100 or so of them, started cheering. It was glorious. So by the way, the pill turned out to be Benadryl.dl. Dr. Brother got suspended for 5 days for throwing away a Benadryl pill. Funny side note, I said I played a small part in this. Here it is. The principal originally came to get me, not my brother, because I was the one who was typically getting into trouble. When they were told it was my brother, they thought it must be a mistake, so they came to get me. In primary school, we had a zero tolerance for bullying. I was kicked in the stomach, nothing happened. I was pushed down the stairs, nothing happened. I was pushed into a beck, nothing happened. I was punched on a daily basis, nope. They hated me. So one day, they decided to spread a rumor. At 8 years old, I had no idea what one of these was, but they came out and said my dad was a pedo. My mum went rushing into the school in floods of tears, demanding these children were expelled. Now, Hype made the kids write a letter of apology. They then called my mum in, where they told her she couldn't read the letter as it was school property and data protection laws kicked in. No child was expelled. After that, I had 3 lasses on my back, strangling me with a skipping rope. Skipping ropes were banned for the rest of the school year. It was May, so that's only 2 months. In high school, there was also a zero tolerance guideline for bullying. I started to cut myself and attempted to top myself a few times. Kids found out about this and made it worse. I was given a free tip/promise ring for my 16th from my boyfriend at the time. Everyone bullied me for being engaged. I wasn't. The teachers knew about this. I told them everything and said this has been going on since day 1 of primary school. This was the end of year 11th. They made my life a living hell. My head of year, who sadly was killed last year, kept us both in the same class doing the same detentions because the other girl was bullying me. Okay, awesome. Thanks to that, I'm extremely uptight around people, and I find it hard to let it go that people aren't out to hurt me, but it's all I've ever known. People hurting me constantly. These kids had no idea the psychological impact they had on me, but even the therapist said it's all my fault. I bring it all on myself. Nah bitch, these kids strangled me, and I got in trouble for most of this because I wouldn't play with them. Are you surprised? Zero tolerance my ass. My mum wouldn't even put me in a different school. I still don't know how to forgive her. My old vice principal had a grudge against me. I got decked in the mouth on the bus because I had stomached enough verbal harassment, and I called another kid's mother a whore. He was banned from using the bus for 2 weeks, and we were both suspended for a day. I took a vacation, thought nothing of it. My parents didn't care. Later on, I made an innocent joke. The school police officer, yeah I know, American public education, overheard, and I was suspended for cracking a joke. The police officer and his buddy the vice principal dogged me for weeks following that. I was apparently falling in with the wrong group of kids because I made friends with the maladjusted preteen kid who threatened to shank a bully. I later got in a verbal altercation between this kid and another. The one kid left, but the other kept shit talking. We were doing that circle strafe thing where both parties are shit talking and say swing first bruh. I wound up manipulating his walking and he fell over a stack of gym mats. I didn't get suspended though because neither of us ratted on the other. Nothing happened. My maladjusted friend vouched for me as well. 30 minutes later, I get sent to the principal's office for putting a small plastic cone on my hand and pretending I was Mega Man. Vice principal was watching the gym class because he thought I would try something funny, and he thought my pretend cone gun was threatening behavior. The principal told me to call my mom and have her discuss the possibility of another suspension. She drove down later that evening and walked straight into his office and laid into him, starting with a satisfying "Now you listen here. I resent the staff at that public school. I resent them all. Especially the vice principal. Hopefully he's died in the span of time I've been gone." This is kind of different than a zero tolerance policy, but another way having to follow strict guidelines for breaking rules is frustrating and counterproductive. In the last inner city middle school where I taught, I caught a student stealing a pencil holder filled with markers from off my bookshelf. I had markers and supplies always out for the kids. These were mine. I confronted the kid and he lied about taking them, said they were his, but I obviously took them back, because they were mine. I wrote the kid up. We weren't allowed to write referrals, and I rarely ever do, but stealing from a teacher, come on. It wasn't what he took, just the fact he tried going through my stuff, lied, and tried to steal it all. He got no punishment at all, except he had to make retribution, but since he didn't technically steal he didn't have to do anything. The app called his mom, but she never answered. So he only got a consequence from me, but knew the admin knew, and didn't get in trouble. It was his first offense, so they weren't allowed to give him detention or ICE or lunch detention. I told the app that was bullshit and I'd give kids lunch detention for talking when I am, or missing too much homework, but that's what the code of conduct says, so no punishment. Fast forward a couple months and this same kid got mad at me and tore a couple student trackers off the wall, ripping one almost completely in half while walking out the door. Again, first offense for vandalism, so no consequence, just him having to pay retribution, which meant paying for the charts he ruined. He never did. I said there should be a consequence for not following his consequence, but that was apparently unreasonable. I don't rely on admin for my management 95% of the time, but some things need to be taken to a higher level. I've written up like 5 kids ever. It is a really small school, so the kids know everyone knows what happens, and then see no action takes place, because the code of conduct doesn't let them. This kid was in 6th grade. I had 31 kids in that class, and the average age was 13. I had several 14 and 15-year-olds in that class. Again, 6th grade. They were grouped together because of their very low reading levels and or their poor behavior. Last block, right after lunch. Class was a hot mess. At least pretending to have my back would be nice. Then I'm on a field trip to a museum, out of town about 2 hours away in a huge tourist location. I caught a kid stealing from the gift shop and told him to put it back. Then before getting a chance to talk to him, I had to leave because 3 other students were fist fighting in the lobby outside the gift shop. The kid trying to steal got 0 punishment because he didn't technically steal. The code says first offense is retribution, but he had nothing to pay for. No one from admin would even call home about it. I finally just told my students, if I so much as see you steal a pencil, I'm going to wait until you get outside of my door and call the police. The police station shares our parking lot, and I'm not even going to tell the admin. I'm just going to call, and they can come deal with you. You know the school isn't doing anything, so I'm going to do it my way. That day I had about 25 students write me a note telling me one girl stole a box of goldfish crackers we needed for a lab while I was absent. I knew it was missing, and I'm still trying to figure out how the teaching using my room that day didn't notice a child stealing a 2-gallon carton of goldfish. I know some people think following strict rules with no consideration is bad for the students because they are unfairly punished, but it's also bad for the students when they aren't punished at all. Another one. I went to school on an American base in Germany. School policy was no alcohol on school grounds. Well, I had bought a case of beer the night before, but was too lazy to take it inside the house, so I left it in the trunk of my car. I was in class, and I said, oh shit, I left the beer in my car to my buddy. Some girl overheard it. Well, the school day was ending. That's when the vice principal and principal came up to me and said, we need to inspect your vehicle. I saw the clock. It was 2:35. The school day ended at 2:45. I stalled them as long as I could. It was now past 2:45. I had been careful to not admit any guilt and deny or wrongdoing. I said, fine, let's go out to my car and check for yourself. Now, I always had a policy of backing my car into the parking spot. I was accused of having beer in the trunk of my car, so I went to the back with both of them and stood with them at the back of the car. I then pretended the trunk was locked and said I was going to unlock the car. I jumped in the driver's seat, turned on the car and drove away with them chasing after me. I ignored them, got home, took the beer out of my car. My dad had already gotten a call from them. They were furious that I had ran away. And I said to my dad, had they caught me with a beer in the car I'd be expelled, fail my finals, and have to repeat the year. Whatever they do to me tomorrow will be better than if they would have found out I had beer on me. He understood. Said you deal with it. Next day I get called in the principal office. She's fucking furious at me. She said she needs to check my trunk. I smirk and say sure, here are my keys, go ahead. We went out and my car was alcohol free. I smiled and said, I told you I didn't have any alcohol in my car. She fired back at me, then why did you run away? I said I didn't, I was just in a hurry to get to work. She said, I'm revoking your parking privilege. I said that's cool. So that was my punishment. I could no longer park on school grounds. I just parked in base housing right next to the school grounds. Came home, told my dad what my punishment was. He thought it was hilarious, called me a smartass, and we had a few beers together. Going to high school in Germany was awesome. I'm late to this, so unlikely this will be read, but there was this girl in middle school, and she was just flat out mean to me. One morning I make my way to the cafeteria and she's speaking with one of my best friends, and I remember I go to sit down near the friend. And this girl, we'll call her Ashley BC, that's her name, makes fun of how I walk. And I'm sensitive about it, so I trade some words with her, and she storms off. And I continue eating. Fast forward to pet, and I'm sitting out the mile run BC of my leg brace, and Ashley comes out and says the rudest thing any middle schooler can say after talking about me again. She says, no one was talking to you. Well, that pisses me off as she's talking about me within earshot. She was telling her friend that I'm so mean BC. I stood up for myself while insulting her. I tell her, how are you going to make fun of how I wore something I can't help when you over the looking ugly as day wearing worn out ugly clothes? This was pet, so those type of clothes are expected, but I mean I was 12, so I thought I was smooth. In any case, this causes Ashley to run off crying. The next day I'm told I will be suspended BC of a zero tolerance policy. My mind was blown. The counselor said teasing was not allowed. I tried to plead my case and was hushed and told to avoid her because I made her cry. TLDR, I stand up for myself with words and nearly get suspended while Ashley is free to roam. I got pushed into a locker by my friend who was really upset about something. He didn't want to talk about it, and when I asked he got upset. Same thing happened to another kid. A third kid, who never got along with the angry friend, started pestering him, and the angry one ended up kicking the shit out of him. Kid 3 kept taunting, saying he didn't feel anything when he got kicked, just trying to get more of a rise out of him. Eventually, while the two fighters were in the office, my name got dropped, and so did the other kid that got shoved to the side. We both got called in to give our version of events. Both of us said the same thing, and because of zero tolerance, all of us had the same punishment for being involved in a fight. Raise the flag every morning before school, more of a punishment for the rest of my family than me, and spread mulch during any free time that we might have for the next 2 weeks. After the first day of the punishment, the two kids that were actually fighting were set free. Somehow, they worked out a deal with the principal where they could write a brief essay about how it's wrong to fight, and be done with the whole thing. The two of us that had been shoved into lockers, however, were not offered the same mercy. Because we were implicated for inciting the fight by asking what was wrong, we were somehow guilty of a much worse crime and had to complete our punishment. To this day, I'm still not sure what it is I did wrong. I just remember my parents and brother being upset that I got punished for something and that they had to leave an extra half hour early every morning. It just pisses me off that we asked why we were being punished, and the answer was that we were involved in the early stages of the fight. Made no sense to me. In 8th grade I had this rival all year that I'd always butt heads with when it came to anything. We had a constant back and forth all year till a few weeks before summer, so all year things have been leading up to this moment when he shoves me as hard as he can during gym. I take the blow and stay on my feet, giving him the "I'll come at me, you can't" arm pose. Of course, being two males going through puberty, this was not the end of it, and we both make plans to beat the other's ass back in class. So we get in class and he immediately picks up a chair and gets ready to bash my skull in. We are both around 6'3", but he had more meat on his bones. So being the smooth criminal I start shit talking with the intention of him putting the chair down and not dying that day. Eventually I finally get him to drop the chair and come at me like a man, and I give him a warning punch to the abdomen. Not to hurt him or anything, but to let him know I'd start swinging if he kept this shit up. We both get sent to the office and immediately he starts breaking down talking about how his dad would beat him. So I feel sorry and tell him I'll get us put of any severe trouble. I tell the principal the truth, that we were just two kids going through puberty and our hormones wanting to be the alpha male got the best of us. We both get 2 weeks in school suspension instead of expulsion. The next day I get called to the office and I'm told the other kid is now out of in-school suspension because he has a bruise just below his ribs. I'm told it was decided I was the aggressor and could have killed the kid by rupturing his kidney because I gave him a bruise. TL. Doctor, kid decides to try and bash my head in with a chair, but is given no punishment because I gave him a warning punch that resulted in a bruise. Well, I have a story about this. Back in my 8th grade science class, I was working on a project that involved cutting paper to make some sort of model or something. I got paired with a resident weirdo. Since I had no friends to work with, there was only one pair of scissors for the two of us, which he was playing with, so I asked him nicely to hand them to me. He didn't react at all, so I asked a bit louder. He then started staring at me for some reason. I asked one more time if he could hand me the scissors, and something must have snapped in him because he then grabbed my wrist and started sawing at it with the open scissor blades. I forget if he drew blood or not, but the teacher eventually interrupted after I yelled several times for him to help. He took both of us outside, had us both explain what happened, and then took us back inside. I was expecting the worst, since the school had zero tolerance signs plastered all over the place, and I had heard some stories of how those policies usually end. I expected to be taken to jail for assault or something, while Mr. Psycho went scot-free. But then, nothing happened. No police, no parents called, no principal, not even a scolding to either of us. The teacher didn't even separate us, he just told us to get back to work after taking away the scissors, which were absolutely vital to the project. The incident was just never mentioned again. I never brought up the issue to anyone. I guess I was just relieved that nothing came out of it. I'm still pissed that fucker got absolutely no punishment, though. I was bullied relentlessly growing up. I was the fat kid, but at the same time, I sprouted to 6 foot tall by the 5th grade. I was just an easy target to the spoiled brats I was surrounded by. Long story short, due to me being bigger than most people there, whenever I responded to physical assault, I was wrong every single time. I was subsequently treated as though I had anger issues and had to endure BS counselings as a result. Fast forward to the second to last day of 8th grade, middle school. At this school, the PE class was the class the administrators threw the problem children in. I mean the types that are really bad. Due to the overcrowding forcing a lottery-style class selection system, which fucked me over in HS, BTW, I was put into a PE class, unnecessarily, for a second time. By 8th grade, I was about 6'3", still a bit chubby. These were the worst of the worst kids I wanted to be surrounded by. I was the captain of the school crime watch program too, so that probably didn't sit well with these punks. Second to last day, on the basketball court in the gym, a group of about 13 or so of these kids decided it'd be fun to play dodgeball with me, using the basketballs. I was literally surrounded and being pelted in the head/face repeatedly. They then decided to get more physical, in that they were running up to me, swinging a few punches and running away. You know what I did? Nothing. Absolutely nothing at that point in time. Why? Because it was what I was always told to do, because I had anger issues and I cannot retaliate per every school teacher/admin I ever dealt with. What happens next? One of the smaller assholes comes from behind, jumps and wraps his arms around my neck, using his hands to squeeze my throat. It was obvious what he was trying to do. I couldn't breathe. This guy was trying to kill me, for fuck's sake. I took one swing of my fist up to my right side, where his face was, and hit him directly in one of his eyes. That knocked his ass to the ground, where he ran away crying. For those wondering where the fuck the gym teacher / coach is, he's sitting in the corner, arms folded, watching and laughing the entire time. Who stopped it? The head of security for the school, who happened to be walking by chance. My glasses were busted, and I was bruised for a while. So, here's only myself, and the kid I hit in the eye, in the assist principal's office, the asshole of the century. He didn't give a flying fuck. He came directly at me, and demanded I tell him why I hit the kid in the face. I explained everything that had happened up to him trying to choke me out. He refused to believe any of it, despite the security lead stumbling upon it. Nope. Zero tolerance, he yelled at me, and suspended me for the remaining 2 days I was supposed to be there. The kid that choked me out got absolutely nothing. The other kids involved, nothing. Looking back on how things happened, I wish I just didn't give a fuck. My mistake was not beating the shit out of the first spoiled rich fucktard to tell others to back the fuck off / rant. 7th grade, fire drill. Some douche-dick decides to start punching me because, why not? He's weak, so his punches don't hurt, and I'm kind of standing there telling him to stop. He doesn't. I say, fuck off, asshole. He doesn't. Instead, he goes for my head. Well, I should tell you that I'm a year younger than this guy, but I'm almost a foot taller. I was the second tallest kid in the school, after some 6'7" giant called Stewie. At this point, I'm also standing on the side of a steep hill, so my head is about 18 inches above his. Why does this matter? Because the only part of my head he can reach is my jaw. So he slugs me in the jaw, and I'm completely unprepared, so I lose my balance, rolling down the hill. I get up, and I'm not taking any shit anymore. I'd never been in a fight before, but I had some muscle, and, like I said before, about 10 inches on the guy point, so I'm casually stepping out of range of his swings now. Good thing, because now he's punching to hurt. I'm making him look like a fool, and we have a small crowd watching us now, including his sister and his girlfriend, so he's getting pissed. His fault. I may be a straight A student with big ass glasses, but I'm also a foot taller than you, dumbass. He charges me, but I'm ready for him. I back up a few paces like I'm scared, then at the last minute feint to the right, then go to the left and kick him solidly in the thigh. Note, this is the first hit either of us has landed, since he hit me in the face. Suddenly, we hear the loudest whistle we've ever heard. Enter Mr. Slane, the second least liked teacher in the school and the teacher whose class both myself and Big Little were in when the fire drill started. He just saw a tall guy kick a small guy, and zero tolerance, so it's off to the administration office with both of us. Fortunately for me, I had made some friends, directly and through a reputation as an excellent student, in the office. Can't say the same for my little buddy. So I get the benefit of the doubt, and the lightest possible punishment under the rules. Rest of the day in school suspension, lunch detention for the rest of the week, and he gets sent home for a week and a half. I would have objected. Seriously, I have to sit around here doing nothing, and he gets to play video games for 10 days, but I had a hunch that his dad wouldn't be too pleased that some scrawny nerd had beaten his son in a fair fight. I know that if my relationship with the school administrators had been a bit less awesome, I would have been faced with some more serious punishment, and that's what I fucking hate about the system. Not only does it not work for victims, but it rewards the people who it likes more. In a criminal court, that kind of preferential treatment would be conflict of interest, or even corruption. The only thing worse than zero tolerance is selected tolerance. TL. Doctor, the system liked me, so it worked for me, and I hate it for that. When I was in grade 7, we were having a snowball fight some distance from the school behind a hill. Pretty innocent stuff. Then this kid in grade 9 comes up and slams me in the back of the head. Not so innocent. I think to myself, an eye for an eye, and do the same to him. Now, probably not the best decision, because this kid was 2 years older and a full foot taller, or 30.48 centimeters. He grabs the front of my jacket and starts feeding me his fist, and we fall over as I attempt to backpedal. After we're down, he sounds pretty gassed, and I realize that I'm not going to get out of this scot-free, even if the faculty hears from all the witnesses that have gathered around. I get out of his grip. I remember him saying, "Dude, the fight is over," and his friends nearby saying it's done. And I start hitting back, even pressing my thumbs into his eyes and kneeing him in the chest point. He falls over and I kick him a few times, once in the face I ike, and he's bleeding quite a bit at this point. His friends pull me off of him while mine start cheering and tell me that I should probably head back and tell my side first point. Not terribly proud of the kick to the head, but we both end up being suspended for 3 days in any case, and the school starts posting teachers at the top of the hill. I subbed as a school nurse in a local city school system. Kids would notice the wrong person was in the office and tend to fuck around, show up with nothing wrong to miss class. However, this one poor kid felt awful and coughed a ton. Ended up trying to call someone to at least bring her some medicine, as we couldn't dispense meds outside of what the kids had labeled for them and stored in the tiny fridge/lockbox. Her grandfather lived down the road and brought her cough drops. Kid desperately wanted to finish out the day. Point here is the kicker. He left the bag with me. She couldn't take them with her, and she had to finish the cough drop in the office. As in, she couldn't have any of it in her mouth when she left. What the hell? Honestly, what is an 8 to 10-year-old gonna do with a cough drop? Those things are nasty. It's not like the kids are gonna clamor for them. I've also seen asthma inhalers stored in the nurse's office. That and EpiPens are two things I cannot see being useful when they are in another room, possible another floor, when moments matter. So glad the last preschool I worked at let us at least keep those in the file box. Seriously, do they think kids are gonna offer people puffs? Most kids I've known with chronic conditions, including a 3-year-old with T1 diabetes, are serious about their condition and manage better than some adults I've known. 7th grade, I was ganged up on by 5 kids in the baseball field at the school. Cops came, took my statement, but did nothing about it. School administrators assured me they would be getting in trouble and wouldn't be a problem for me, that they wouldn't be walking at graduation, and that they wouldn't be going on the trip to Washington the very next day they were in school. And I got attacked in the hallway again by the same kids, 3/5 of them at least. The school chose not to believe me and didn't follow up. When we went to Washington, not only did the kids get to go, but they put one of them in the hotel room next to mine. Meanwhile, I was still getting threats from them every time they saw me. They also walked at graduation. Their punishment turned out to be absolutely nothing. They didn't even make them apologize. Point next year, same school, I was talking to a girl and she said something sassy at me as a joke. I turned towards her and gave her an exaggerated mean look and then made a quick jerk of my leg like I was gonna kick her shit under the table, then chuckled at her. Suddenly a teacher is running at me screaming physical contact. Really? That's what you come yelling, and pretty much tackles me into a desk and is trying to pin me down and telling people to get away from me. I immediately got suspended for a week, then had to spend my recesses for about a month in the student support center, and they wanted me to see the school therapist over anger issues. All of this was despite the fact that the girl immediately cleared up the fact that I had not hit her and that we were friends. They decided that the look I gave her indicated some anger problems and went on to say that it was likely why I had instigated the fight that happened a year before. They decided to blame me getting gang beaten on imaginary anger problems because of a joke with a friend a year later, but didn't care one bit at the fact that I got beaten unconscious, then lifted up and beaten more by 5 people that I didn't know. The whole zero tolerance policy is bullshit and doesn't help anyone. This happened my junior year of high school. For about 4 or 5 years I had been shooting for a competitive rifle team. I wasn't the best, but I was the best for my age group. My entire school knew 2.0. I'm a few weeks into junior year and the team was closing down for the winter. We decided to go shooting together one last time. So we go to the gun range, and I set up my stuff, shoot, and clear the line. Well, as I'm cleaning my stuff up and storing it, I'll borrow club gear. A police officer sits up next to me and has a misfire. At this point, my gear bag is completely empty, and I've double checked my bag. It was empty. The officer ejects his misfire while I'm out of the room. I come back in, grab my bag, and head home. Then I started using the bag for cross country, which the practices were right after school. A full week later, the school goes into a lockdown procedure. We all think that it's a drill and just wait. It lasted 45 minutes, as compared to the normal 15. That's when we knew something was wrong. Rumors started to circulate about a bullet being found in the locker room. Everyone starts to stare at me. Lockdown ends. School continues as normal. After XC practice, I went to the police station to ask what had actually happened. It had been a damaged bullet, and it had been found near my bag. It's good to be friends with the police chief. I tell him about the police officer who had been shooting near me. We figure out it had probably come from that. This is a Monday. Tuesday morning I go into school and go straight to the principal. I told what had happened, and he got into contact with the police chief. Then he sent me home with a promise of we'll be fair and look into this with your history in mind. I go home and get a call from him around noon. I got a 2-week suspension from school with expulsion if I came onto school property. Meanwhile, I was taking 3 app courses and 5 honors courses, and I wasn't allowed to contact the school in any way. I was also required to go and get a psychological evaluation to see if I was dangerous to anyone. And why was I suspended? For knowingly bringing a deadly and dangerous weapon into school. The principal went to the town newspaper and said through the investigative processes of the school, we have ascertained the identity of the student responsible and taken a measured and reasonable response. No mention of the student coming forward and freely admitting what had happened. Meanwhile, the person who went through my personal bag and decided they wanted to cause a scene went unpunished. However, I passed all classes and am currently enrolled at the University of Massachusetts, Lowell, in the mechanical engineering program. So I'm pretty happy with how it turned out. Edit. TL. Doctor, got a 2-week suspension because of a bullet found in my bag. TLDR, my friend was caught riding my longboard in school and the principal suspended me for a week. A little backstory: I'm in 12th grade and I longboard to school, just as I have for the past year. I always leave my board in one of my classrooms during the day and grab it at the end of the day to skate home. One time I was riding around a bit on my board in the halls and a teacher came up to me and told me not to ride it inside school. I said okay and never rode in school after that. Forward a few weeks, I'm staying after school for a club, and my friend's little brother takes my board when I'm not looking and starts riding around in the halls. The principal, Dr. Baker, catches him and returns the board to me. Dr. Baker tells me not to let anyone ride it inside school anymore. I tell him I didn't know he had the board, but he didn't believe me. Later in the week I'm walking out of school, and I set my board down to grab my water from my backpack. A friend, let's call him Derek, grabs my board, runs out the front doors of the school, and starts riding out front. Of course, I can't stop him, since he's going so fast, so I make my way through the doors towards him. Out of the corner of my eye, I see Dr. Baker walking from afar, towards Derek, who is skating in my direction. I stop Derek and grab my board from him. Dr. Baker shows up, and demands the board from me. I respectfully refuse, because it wasn't me who was riding the board, and he had no right to take it from me. Baker tries to pry it from my hands, and continues to demand the board. After an intense tug of war with Baker, he finally lets go. He is furious. He tells me, if I want to return to school tomorrow, I need to bring my parents with me, so they can talk. He storms away into the building, and I skate home. Baker is infuriated. Derek overheard him saying I want that ginger kid expelled. Derek told Dr. Baker that he knew he wasn't supposed to ride it, tells him that he will accept the punishment if there is any. The vice principal talked Baker out of expelling me and brought the punishment down to 5 days of suspension. Dr. Baker says I got off easy. I've posted this story before, but it needs to be said again, because zero tolerance is the dumbest thing ever. Only the Sith and high school principals deal in absolutes. My school instituted zero tolerance policy back when it was a new idea. Nobody stopped to think for 1 second about the ramifications of what they were doing before implementing it. It ended up increasing fights in the school by 1000%. Here's a policy. Both parties of a fight get 1 hour after school detention regardless of culpability. Point 3 detentions in a school year results in an all-day in-school suspension for each future infraction. Point suspensions in a school year will result in expulsion. So it went like this: D/D/D/S/S/S/S/E, seventh strike being expulsion. Now this would only happen if someone got caught fighting/bullying. Bullies had been doing this for years. They know when a good time to strike is and how to avoid the eyes of teachers. Now upon reading this, the gears started turning. Myself and 2 friends had been tormented by a particularly nasty bully for the better part of 8 years. By this point, we now had a means to remove this individual from the school at very little cost to ourselves. I walk up to the bully in the halls, directly in front of several teachers, and crack him with a book. He gets a good jaw shot on me before the teachers break it up. We both get detention that evening. The next day my friend walks up behind said bully at lunch and dumps a carton of milk on him. Detention for both of them. The prey had become the hunters. Within 2 weeks he was up for expulsion. The school board was obviously not happy with us. Threatened us with exclusion too, on the grounds that we were a gang. We told them it was a lazy and bad disciplinary policy. They told us if we do that again we'd all get expelled and they'd repeal it next year. It'd be too costly/time consuming/see lazy above to create a new policy and print handbooks. Fun addendum. Not more than a month later we got called back in over a similar incident and they wanted to blame us. Apparently another group of students saw what we did or got the same idea. At the time I remember remarking something along the lines of, "I can see the headlines now. School expels 3 honor students because that's our policy. Fuck that place." My boyfriend was a troublesome child before they got his meds figured out and diagnosed with ADHD. He was shipped around from school to school. Wherever his program was hosted that year he was only suspended once that I know of, and it's the most ridiculous story. I only believe it because I know him and this is absolutely something he would do. Point in 7th grade he got bored during school, as you do. So he got a hold of a copy of the school's floor plans, like the shitty little maps that came in our planners, and began writing up plans for how to take over the school. But this was no ordinary takeover plan. No, this plan involved a trained SWAT team made of squirrels. His teacher saw this and sent him to the vice principal. She already didn't like him, so she called his mother. She works 45 minutes away with traffic. It was midday, and she was busy. She was very irritated at having to come get him, but she did, because the VP wouldn't explain without her there. Point she had to come pick him up and take him home for a 3-day suspension because of a squirrel takeover plot written up by a bored, unstable, ADHD-riddled 12-year-old. Point she was not pleased with the VP's handling of the situation. Point he coincidentally started up at an alternative school. The next year, by sheer luck of the program being moved again, he was not expelled over hypothetical squirrels. Though the squirrels on our college campus are so tame he keeps threatening to bring back the takeover plans. This was way before ZT, but my school used the idea whenever it suited them. When I went there, some background. I was a nice kid, but had a few issues after 2nd grade. One was hypoglycemia, which wasn't diagnosed until I was 14, still trying to fix that damage, and the other was finally having someone realize I was being raped by a family friend and being helped. 2nd grade. Now before all that, teachers loved me. I was stupid, helpful, nice, and loved learning so much. I acted out sometimes, but generally they assumed I was a great kid. Then I hid counseling, and that fucked my head up this ways for Sunday, and I got cranky, cried during class, and started becoming unresponsive sometimes. Mix of sugar crashing harder from same size meals from 3-year-olds, 12th, and depression hitting. The teachers started hating me with the exception of my 3rd grade teacher, who tried to help. I wonder still if they knew what happened and why I left class once a week. Background: over my 3rd grade year one of my guy friends started learning karate, while my other friends and I weren't so lucky. We wanted to learn too, so we made a karate club, and he taught us poses and the silly jump tricks. For a bit I felt confident and like I could protect myself. One of our friends was a huge bitch and we wanted to kick her out of the group entirely. She caught wind and started a huge argument over kicking other people out, stupidly even saying the only person actually taking karate. This culminated at recess when my BFF of the time and I got into a slap fight and she knocked my glasses off. Now we were actually mad and fighting, but the problem was the girl we wanted to kick out went over and stepped on my glasses to destroy them, then ran to a supervisor and said the leader did it. Her and another member made a huge story about how we were bullying the little kids and I was leading the bullying and how the kid teaching us broke my glasses. It was all bullshit. In a school of 300, 3-year-old 12, no one but those two could back up the story. No one had been bullied by us and we had never laid a hand on anything but the big tree outside. Hell, most of us were the bullied. Didn't matter though, they labeled us a gang and sent me and 3 others to ICE. The rest were suspended. My dad beat the shit out of me repeatedly over it and I was grounded for a while, out track of the time but over a month. To this day I'm astounded that us playing karate lead to all of that BS. It sucked afterwards as the boys figured out teachers wouldn't listen to me, so I was open game for serial harassment for a bit with only "well don't encourage him / make him want you" as the only response. I was labeled as a bad kid until I left over it. When I was in high school, I had some skin problems, moderate acne on my face, eczema that was horrible in the winter. I went to a dermatologist who gave me an recipe gel for my face, used in the morning on a clean face, and before bed on a clean face. I had first period gym class and we took a required swimming class. Since it was my first period class, I didn't wear any makeup to school and brought my recipe to apply after swimming, so it didn't just get washed away in the pool. I also had a spot on my ribs where my eczema had gotten really nasty and I developed an infection known as intertrigonote. Images from Google search. Mine was quite similar. This spot was basically where my bra sat, so it was constantly being irritated by contact. It was wet and it smelled. As a 16-year-old girl, that shit was embarrassing and I was freaking out that people could smell me. I was given a tube of clotrimazole, which is an recipe strength topical antifungal with a small dosage of steroids to help reduce the spread of the infection. So, we finish swim class and I shower, dry off, make sure my gross spot of smelly death infection is completely dry, and apply that medication before getting dressed. Then, I'd apply my first dose of acne gel while walking through the hall on the way to class, since I didn't need a mirror to just rub something all over my face. I had both tubes in my hand as I was leaving the locker room, because I put them back in the glove box of my car during homeroom. My teacher was cool, let me do this during announcements, so I wouldn't forget to bring them back home. My gym teacher was a real hard-ass, and loved to bust people for stupid shit. Saw me walking, and asked what I was holding. I had no problem saying that it was 2 topicals that I needed for my face and an infection from my eczema. She takes a look at the 2 tubes and sees that they're recipe, then immediately tells me that I need to follow her. Now, I'm standing in the administration office because she's trying to get me busted for possession of medication. Luckily, I got the assistant principal that was very reasonable, and he spoke to me after the gym teacher went back to start her next class. She couldn't be late, but she sure as shit could make me late. Basically, he asked what the meds were, answered honestly why I was carrying them instead of dropping them off at the clinic. Again, honest answers. The biggest issue reason is that I needed to apply the clotrimazole to dry skin before any clothing makes contact. I certainly can't walk down to the nurse's office topless, could I? Plus, I needed them for multiple applications during the day. Was it really logical to pick it up and drop it off each morning when that requires a parent to do so? And if I was aware of the zero tolerance drug policy? Yes, I was very aware of the policy. I didn't even carry aspirin or OTC cold medicine with me to school. However, the wording in our handbook was vague and led me to believe that it was limited to ingestible drugs, as those were the type that people were apt to abuse. I actually wound up not getting into any trouble because I was so confused over the whole thing. Plus, he did agree that the wording of the handbook was vague. I tried my hardest to be polite and respectful because I really was a good kid. but I did make my point by asking him if a female student had a yeast infection and she had to deal with medication that was not taken orally, wouldn't they want to give her the benefit of allowing her to deal with that on her own? Or would she have to make this big production out of registering the medication with other students present in the office, making a special trip to the clinic, and requesting her medication by name? Again, other students may be present, then having to use the office restroom to administer the medication? Or would it be much more beneficial for all parties to just let her quickly and quietly handle her needs by making a quick stop to the restroom between classes? I was shocked beyond belief to find that this guy sat across from me and nodded in agreement. Basically, my entire argument about topical versus ingested medication was the entire reason that he wouldn't pursue any discipline for my medicinal possession. He actually said that he's glad to see that I didn't get caught with the same medicine, but in pill form, because it would have been harder to defend and cite the vagueness of the policy wording. I was allowed to leave with a pass to my car, then to class. No further issues came from that incident point. My biggest victory was the smug look I had on my face whenever I saw that damn gym teacher. She had some weird dislike for me, but I never figured out what the hell I did before this incident. I can't say she eased up afterwards though, but I still got an A in her class. Since it was a mandatory swimming class, and I was on swim team, she couldn't ding me on my grade, performance based, or effort plus PARTICIPATION for weak swimmers, without a provable reason. I know this will get buried, but anyone who finds this will be rewarded with this awesome story. Okay, so in 5th grade, I didn't go to the best school district. There were some super violent kids, you know, the ones with parents in the military. All they do is play COD and work on their roundhouse kicks. Well, just call them Jacob, Andrew, and Jacob 2.1 day. They're all hanging out talking about how many steroids they do, or whatever, and Jacob just blurts out, hey, we should beat up so and so. Yeah, Jacob 2 says, and why not so and so, to this carries on until they have a hit list of about half the school. Seriously, half the lunchroom was listening to them, and by the end of lunch almost everyone knew there was to be some sort of rave going on at recess. It was chaos. Picture yourself outdoors with a group of 200 plus 5th graders shouting at each other, trying to kill each other. Seriously, it was so massive every adult in the whole school was called out to stop it. They had to even barricade the school doors to stop people from sneaking back inside. Avoid punishment. Only about 75% of the kids participated in the fight, but about 95% got sent to counseling for it because they didn't tell a teacher. The next few days everyone was having a counseling session in the cafeteria, while barely anyone went outside. My own kids, the 2 older boys, were both the victims in school fights. Being a teacher myself, I know that the whole defending yourself clause doesn't always work, but I'd rather have them do that than take a full-on beating. So, yeah, they both were suspended for 2 days for fighting. I took my evidence to the appeals offices and got the suspensions removed from their records. On the other hand, as a teacher, I've been involved in some ridiculous shit that should have resulted in suspensions or even an expulsion. However, our school district is moving towards that touchy-feely mode called restorative justice, so ZT looks like this. 2 girls filed false sexual harassment charges against me. After much back and forth, with the crappy admin siding with the girls, I finally found a witness who disproved their entire story. Police chose not to press charges. Both girls given 3 days suspension. Wrote an apology. Student of mine plans my murder on social media. I shit you not. Parents blamed me for being a bad teacher. Investigation ensues. Result: student given 5-day suspension, moved from my class, but allowed to stay at school. I filed a restraining order, basically forcing the school to schedule her classes well away from my room. Police and the DA declined to file formal charges because there was no way she would have been able to carry out the threat. After investigation closed, it was discovered that her father-owned 3-gun. Student brings knife to school, takes it out in my room and shows it to the other students. Hauled down to office. Parents called. According to the ZT, he should have had at least a 3-day suspension. Result: spent 1.5 days sitting in the office for on-site suspension. Returned to my classroom 2 days later. Zero tolerance, my shiny white ass. Back quote. So, I went to an independent school in England, so straight away the rules are already stricter. Anyway, the boarding house I was in had a particularly brain-dead housemaster. He taught geography of course, and was generally useless at most things, so he and I didn't get along for the 3 years I spent living around him. Had quite a few arguments with him, and such point anyway. Fast forward to one of my last nights in the house, before moving into a different house for upper 6th, think last year of high school I guess. We have a house football, soccer, matches. It's the end of the year. It's year 12, my year, with year 10s versus year 9 and 11s. The year 11s were cunts. So, the game starts, and I get an early goal after running through and beating a few players. The other team starts targeting me with some heavy tackles, so I start giving it back. This goes on for about 20 minutes, and we exchange some heated words. I then shoulder barge a kid off the ball and carry on my way and pass the ball. All of a sudden, I get punched in the back of the head. I'm fine these days, but back then it didn't take much to send me into a rage, so this did the trick. I chased after the kid, put him in a headlock and just smashed him in the face as hard as I could, and he ends up in the slump on the floor with a bloody nose. Point now, the detail I left out was my housemaster was in goal for one of the teams. The only part of this whole incident he saw was me chase the kid, put him in a headlock, and put him on the deck. I see him come charging over, screaming at me, and the game ends there. We get kept behind, while everyone else is sent back inside. The kid then tries to deny even touching me, which sends me through the roof, and I walk off without talking to the two cunts. Fast forward, and I'm in the head of discipline's office, who basically doesn't care, because it happened in a sporting environment. Boys'll be boys and all that. He tells us both off and sends us on our way. Point my housemaster wasn't done though, being the cunt he was, and banished me to my room while the rest of my housemates had beers on their last evening, a rare treat for 17-year-olds still in school. He threatened me with jail term on the basis that I'd hit a minor who was fucking taller than me, I should mention, and then when I said it was self-defense, he rubbished the idea. So, to keep my company, my friends came up to my room and smuggled me up a beer, but the king of cunts wasn't finished. He came up and asked why they were in my room, and when they said, because he's our friend, I could see the cunt die inside a little. Never been more mad in my life. The other kid got off scot-free. Snaps the little collection of tiny crystals in a bit of paper you throw, and when they hit something they make a noise. You can make them go off by squeezing them between your fingers for the same effect. They are completely harmless. Brought him into school. This was the early 80s before the current insanity, but our principal was a forerunner of zero tolerance thinking. Possession of fireworks. Suspension. A scare story / lecture from Mrs. Brown, the white-haired clown, about how one boy had these in his back pocket while he was skateboarding and fell on his backside. They blew up so bad they blew his ass off. She screamed at my 9-year-old self. She tried to continue the story by telling me about the skin graft the boy needed and really lay on the horror, but I was laughing so hard she eventually stopped. When my parents showed up I told about her blatantly made up story and the punishment, and my dad said, "Damn it son. I'm not mad about what you did, but now I have to go in and talk this idiot." Thank goodness for good parents I missed a few days and tried harder not to get caught in the future. Later that year Mrs. Brown held a school-wide vote for what would be our new mascot. Almost unanimously, Wolverine, the animal, not the Canadian one. She decided our mascot would be a teddy bear instead. So I had never been drunk before, and I really wanted to try it with my friend. I got an older friend to buy some vodka for us. The next day at school he brought it disguised as a water bottle. One shot turned into two into three, and eventually I had drank about 10. It was a cold day, and I had matches in my bag, because we were trying to make moonshine, unsuccessfully, and we needed matches to light the gas stove, to distill the alcohol out. I was lighting these matches in the bathroom when I had the bright idea that it would make more warmth if I lit up the paper towel. Then I went home. The school called my parents later and told them there was a fire and they should come to the school. They locked me on the office and interrogated me. Of course I gave them nothing, saying I didn't know anything, even though they saw it was only me in the bathroom at the time. I wasn't thinking about cameras, because it was completely by accident. Eventually some dumbass snitches about me having matches, at which point my parents don't buy my story about me having nothing to do with the fire. I admitted it, because threatened to get the police involved. So I was expelled, and my parents have to pay over $1,000 for the damage. Now my parents believe I have ADHD, because that's the excuse I gave for my actions, so they force me to take huge doses of Ritalin, which I'm convinced are starting to fry my brain. PS principal, if you're reading this and realizing my story about the matches being used for a movie and me having ADHD causing me to do it, go fuck yourself, you expelled me anyway.